And so to come back to the very basics, which I know for many people, hopefully, who are listening in will know, copyright, music copyright comes in two forms. The copyright for the musical composition, the song, and that has two rights within: a mechanical right, called mechanical because it used to involve the mechanical pressing of the song, making mechanical copies, but also the performing right. And then there is the right in the sound recording, so the master. And traditionally we talk about the musical composition rights are the publishing rights, and the sound recording right is the right that in many cases is owned by the label, but increasingly the master right, the sound recording right, may be owned by the artists themselves, and they may work with label services partners or distributors. But we have two copyrights essentially in music, and in music that's being licensed. And so those symbols there we use throughout to kind of explain the different copyrights and how they're used respectively. So in reproduction and distribution, we have in a physical CD, a vinyl, a DVD, a cassette, but also in a download and stream, there is the recording, as amplified by this little recording tape recorder, and a song. In public performance, so when you have radio or TV broadcasts, online broadcasts such as YouTube or Boiler Room, or say a public space in a hairdresser's or a pub, whether or not that's via radio or through music they're playing in public spaces. Also, there is a recording and a song copyright. However, traditionally in a live performance, you're not making a recording. So the artist is performing live. There isn't a recording being made, so there's no involvement in that case of the label. However, the song
there is a whole new terrain open for this with live streaming.
There is, and that is, in fact, we could probably do a whole talk. I nearly thought about doing that. We could probably do a whole talk about the controversies and the challenges that are currently emerging from live stream performance, because we're in a world where artists can't perform live, or it's very limited, their live performance, and so they're increasingly turning to live streaming. And there is a question. So if an audio stream on Spotify involves a recording, which clearly it does, and involves the song, whether or not the artist wrote the song or somebody else wrote the song, both those rights have to be licensed. In a live stream, is there a recording or not? So is there involvement of the label and the label contract? Well, that's questionable. If you're doing live, as you may do with a broadcast, well, is there a recording there? Often it's not clear. It may be that there's a cache, or it may be that it's purely live. In most cases, the labels, I think, recognizing how tough it is for artists at the moment, are not trying to claim the revenue from live streams. However, there clearly is a song right there, and you may have written your own songs, but you may have not written your own songs, and clearly the writer of the song needs to be paid when there's a live stream. So there's a big debate going on, not just in Europe but across the world, about, well, so what should that be? How should that be paid, right? Whether or not it's through donations, or whether you're selling tickets, how much of the money for your live stream should go to the song, and how much of it therefore should be licensed through a collecting society. It's Sky, isn't it, in Spain?
Yeah, there's a new one now called SIDA as well, but Sky is the classical one, the one that's been there for.
Yeah, and in the UK we have PRS, in America they have ASCAP and BMI and CSAC, but there's a question, and it's going on at the moment. So if a live performance in the UK, I think it's 4.5% of the money coming in from ticket revenue must be licensed through the collecting society. Is that right when it's a live stream, or is a live stream more like an audio stream, or like a Spotify stream or an Apple stream, in which case, as we'll see in a moment, there is a higher share of publishing revenue? And so this debate's going on, and it's actually really important, because artists really need money at the moment. So do managers too. If artists aren't earning, managers aren't earning. And certainly in the UK, on average, about 80% of artists' earnings comes from live. And therefore, if you're trying to make some money, you also, of course, you need to pay the songwriter, and you may be the songwriter, but putting that money into a collecting society system that may take a year, 2 years, 3 years to get back to you, when you're in a global pandemic, you don't want to wait 3 years. So it's really, really difficult. And I'm very happy to talk to anyone about it, maybe after this presentation, if people have further questions, because it's a really big topic actually at the moment. I've got several emails in yesterday saying, well, what is fair? We want songwriters to be paid. Our members manage songwriters as well, but we also need to earn money now. So that's the issues around live streaming. To go back to which rights are involved, is there a recording? They're purely songwrite. So, you know, synchronization involves the recording and a song. Cover versions involve the song, and then you make a new recording. So they don't involve licensing the recording. Right. And the reason all of that's important is because the structure of rights and which rights there are within the music are really important for licensing and how they're licensed. And the point of this project was to try and understand how streaming services license, how they're monetized, and how artists and managers can check they're being paid correctly. So it's licensing, which is how copyright makes money. And so a digital service is streaming recordings of songs. And in those recordings, therefore, they have to get the rights from the publisher and the songwriter, and also the collecting society for the songwriter. So SGAI, PRS, SOCAN in Canada, GEMA in Germany. So they need to get the rights for the collecting society for the song and the publisher for the song. And they also need to get the recording rights from the label. And this is the thing with the stream, something that was decided, which sounds really technical, and I can imagine a lot of people switch off when, again, you talk about what is a stream. Well, a stream, according to copyright law, is determined to be a reproduction and a communication. So it's not purely a one-off communication, it's creating a copy, a reproduction as it streams. And this is why it gets murky in live streaming as well, potentially. So when a streaming service is getting its licenses, it needs to get its licenses for song rights and recording rights and make sure that license has reproduction and communication controls. And why is all this important? Well, all this is important because actually this slide is quite out of date. I should have updated it. There's such a huge rise going on at the moment in recorded music revenues. And actually, even, I mean, I remember when this pandemic hit and we were all kind of panicking back in March and April, and we were having discussions within our organisation, but also with government and with labels and with publishers. And, you know, we were saying, oh my gosh, you know, so many of our members have lost their entire summer of income. They can't see when this will end. Everyone is kind of, you know, worried about how are you going to pay your rent? And talking to the labels and publishers at the time, they said, look, we're in an equally bad position. You know, record shops have closed down. We can't sell physical copies in the middle of a pandemic. It's going to hit us as well. People might cancel their streaming subscriptions. You know, we're all in it together. And actually, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. We're not all in this together in the sense that labels have actually seen an upturn. Predominantly, streaming income is so strong at the moment. It's so strong. People haven't yet cancelled their subscriptions. People have been stuck at home. They've been taking out more subscriptions. They've been listening more. They've changed their listening patterns. So they're no longer listening on their commute as they were, you know, to and from the office, but they've increased the streaming subscriptions. And so, I mean, this chart is from a while ago, from 2018, 2 years ago. I suspect if I were to get the latest one, it would have increased even more in favour of streaming. So I've just ruined my exercise, haven't I? Sorry, Joanne, this has gone. Have I managed to make it go backwards? No, I'm going to have to. How do I do this?
No worries. Let's.
I'm going to go back a slide. So.
Okay, no problem.
I was going to. This is really hard to do because we can't do this interactively. But what I was going to ask was, what do people think the split of streaming income is? And it's always.
And we keep seeing who's. No, sorry. Please go on.
I was just saying it's really interesting when we ask this question, how people think the money is shared. And we did this presentation, what was it, a month ago, with a bunch of managers from across Europe. And we said, you know, how much do you think the digital service provider, so the Spotify or the Apple or the Deezer or Tidal?
I was there, and I think most people got it wrong, and they were managers. We were managers. I mean, I got it wrong too. So,
well, I mean, and it's slightly different, to be very fair. It is slightly different in different countries.
Yeah.
So it may depend where you are in Europe. Actually, in America, they have, which I won't go into now, but they have very complex legislation on the publishing side where they've got kind of part state intervention. And so they've actually they see a lower share, much lower share going to the song in America. And that's what, I don't know if anyone reads the music business news, but that's what the big debate about the Music Modernization Act has been in America, and around the tariff review, is to try and get the publisher, the songwriting tariffs pushed up in America to come more in line with the rest of Europe. But as I don't think we can get feedback, can we, live on what people think this is? It's probably easiest to find.
No, I don't. Well, I mean, we could, but it would be complicated.
It might take a while. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe people can write down or just think of how.
I mean, Elena is listening to us. See if anyone is participating, she will interrupt. But...
Okay, cool. So what we were trying to get out is, if this is a pie, this is a digital pie, how is the income coming in? So the €10 a month, or £10 a month, or $10 a month, how is that split between the key players in the music industry? So we're not talking about a per stream rate, we're talking about overall revenue share, essentially. And so I will move on, for anyone who saw the spoiler before. Approximately, and as I say, this does vary country to country, but approximately in Europe, about 54% of the revenue coming into streaming services, approximately 54% goes to the recording. Approximately 14% goes to the song, so the publishing, which also goes to collecting societies, about 14%. And the digital service provider keeps about 30%. And it's also interesting to see whether or not people think that's fair. We had a whole load of discussions about, is that fair? What the DSP keeps, or tries to keep, actually, I think Spotify, it's taken them certainly quite a long time to get anywhere near up to that 30%, because of the big advances they had to pay to get the licenses in the first place. But I understand, about proportionate to a physical retail, so what it costs physical retail. You might say it costs a lot less, which some people certainly would do, to run a online streaming provision rather than physical retail, and you don't have all the physical rents. But they will say the costs of running a digital service provider, actually they're taking no more in revenue share than, you know, in the analog, in the physical world. The rest of the model is different, of course, because we're no longer talking about sales model or a per unit model. We are talking about revenue share. So about 54% now goes to the recording. It might be 53 now. It has gone down slightly, and the amount going to the song has gone up since we started this project. So if anyone does go on our website and downloads the first digital dollar book, which was written at that time, I think that had about 12% going to the song, and 56 or something to the recording. It was something like that. It was correspondingly.
And about the percentage that the DSPs take, there is a whole new conversation as of a few weeks ago, since Spotify said that you may be better positioned on playlists if you reduce your percentage. How is that working already? Do you know, and what's your opinion about that?
So that is extremely new, and it's only in the US, and it's a trial at the moment, I think with 3 or 4 indie labels in the US they're starting it with. And this comes into another discussion. This is an argument that is being made, and I'm sure they would only be able to do this with the agreement of their label partners in order to be able to license in this way. That there is a distinction being made between push and pull. So push is content which the subscriber, the fan, the user hasn't searched for. So it's being pushed at you in the same way that, I guess, if you put the radio on, the DJ is pushing music at you, right? You haven't gone on and said, I want to listen to this artist, that artist. So it's through a playlist. This initial proposal from Spotify is just through their discovery mode, which is the artist radio and I think discovery playlist. And they are saying that for that content that is pushed at you, that the fan hasn't actively gone and pulled down and said, I want to listen to, and searched or taken out of their library, rather they are saying, rather than pay to get onto those playlists, they're going to offer to do a reduced royalty rate to let people to get on those discovery modes. It's highly controversial.
Yeah.
I certainly know that some managers feel that this will be a race to the bottom, and that what we'll see in the long term is potentially all push content, so all content that the fan hasn't actively chosen. You'll end up opting in, because you'll have to opt in as a manager and as an artist. You want people to hear you, so you'll end up having to opt in to a lower royalty rate. And there's a fear then that all of that will go to a lower royalty rate. I mean, I understand it's a trial. It's currently in the US. I guess whether or not that rolls out in Europe will depend on the reaction to it, not only from potentially angry artists and others in the industry, but also the reaction from fans as well. Spotify are very aware that if you push content to people that they don't want to listen to, very quickly they'll stop subscribing. So they know there's a very close balance, isn't there, between
so I don't want to diverge too much from the aim of this presentation, but and also this subject is something that we will talk at length with Sherry Hu and David Krakowski talk on another panel later on this week. But still, I wanted to pick your brain, because I think you have a very clear mind about what you think about these things. And I saw an American writer, Ted Gioia, very recently, also very like a few days ago maybe, or yesterday. He said that eventually these DSP services will charge if you want to. And that's, of course, that's science fiction. But what he said was basically that this is not sustainable, and that eventually people will have to pay for exposure, and the superstars will get it for free, of course, but 80% of the artists who want to be on those services may end up having to pay instead of being paid. Do you think that's a possibility at all, or is that something that may happen?
Well, I think it's extreme. I actually think that's pretty unlikely, because I can't see fans also paying to have a limited content. You'd then switch the entire model on the head. I mean, as a fan myself, I wouldn't. I mean, I don't think that would. But do you think
this would be the first step to make people pay for exposure, wouldn't it?
Obviously, radio has always been like that, right? I mean, people have always had to pay pluggers to get onto radio.
Not that they acknowledge it, but
I'm not saying it's good. It's very, but radio has never been a level playing field. Even, talking to the BBC in the UK, a publicly funded institution, they don't want to be pitched to directly by artists and managers. They don't want to have hundreds of artists pitching their songs directly. They want people to go through pluggers, and to go through pluggers, you have to have a budget to pay pluggers. So you immediately take out a swathe of people. I mean, what Spotify would say is that they would say they've set themselves up so anyone could submit their music, and, they have the Spotify for artists. And so they are saying, and I'm not taking a view on this, but they are saying that they are being more democratic in agreeing a lower royalty rate for a fixed period of time to get into a discovery playlist than asking people for an upfront fee, because they're saying that's the alternative to get on the discovery playlist. You could just do the same as radio and say, right, we want everyone to pay an upfront fee to get onto the service. So they're saying this is more democratic for indies. I think in the long term, all artists will end up, certainly all new artists will end up having to opt in for that lower rate. because if you don't, your competitors are, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's playing with people's desperation.
Yeah.
I think there is a third way, would be an easier access to editors. I mean, it's always so opaque and difficult. Like, at least in Spain, editors are not allowed to give feedback. I mean, you can send them pitch music, but they are not allowed to give you any feedback, which is, I suppose, because that's the policy of Spotify. They don't want um, to give too many clues, and they want to keep the control of what they are pushing. Whereas if you pay, I suppose, then you have that push guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean, and the argument is that if you go on if you agree to or opt in to the lower rate for a discovery in an artist radio for 6 weeks, and then people discover you and like you, the argument then is they'll save you to their libraries, they'll search for your name, they'll buy your tickets, and you will grow your fan base to the extent where you don't need to opt in to a discovery thing because you've built your fan base, which in some ways, there's always been, I mean, I'm sure we will end up with, I mean, there has always been, hasn't there, in the physical world, offering discounts on certain records in order to push other records, that there's always been, let's say, divisions of the value of music in that way. What's been interesting, actually, is that per stream, the rate ends up being the same certainly has been for every artist, but then there are all kinds of issues about how those streams are manipulated and which genres stream more than others. To be honest, we just don't know. We need to see.
Yeah. Let's see how
we need to see, does this trial in the US, and like I say, if it annoys consumers, if it annoys the people paying the subscriptions, if it's too blunt an object, I think it'll be rolled back on pretty quickly.
So let's go back to the split of streaming.
Yeah, so just to move on, I realise my figures are not exactly precise. So this is a presentation I did a while ago. And obviously it varies territory to territory. In France, the amount going to the songs quite a bit more. Mm-hmm. Their collecting society and their publishers, I think, had more leverage negotiating the deals for their French territory than possibly we did certainly in the UK. And America, as I say, is a lot lower. What's interesting, of course, then, is how much gets back to the artist or the songwriter. Traditionally, on a traditional record deal, obviously, what goes back to the artist will depend on the artist's royalty rate, and we'll come on to that later. So a lot of the controversies, or many of the controversies around streaming income, depends on what type of deal the artist is on, which is why we produce the deals guide. And some artists who own their own recordings are seeing 52, 54, 55% of all the money from their streaming coming directly through to them. So, I mean, I certainly know managers of artists who do well on streaming and who do own their own recorded rights. Seeing through the pandemic, I've seen streaming as something really, really positive. Because if you've got a big enough fan base and you've got a million monthly streams, you've got about €3,000 every month coming through your recorded rights. In theory, you've got about €800 going through your song rights. However, the structure of song royalties is even more complicated. So with your recording rights, you can go through a distributor, whether that's a TuneCore or a Ditto or a CD Baby. You can go directly into the streaming services globally, and you can earn on a month-end basis from that. Whereas with your song royalties, in theory, you should be seeing more if you're on a fairer publishing deal, which many are. You should be seeing more money coming back. But because of the structure of song royalty licensing, which I won't go into now, it can take 18 months, 2 years, 3 years to see your song royalty money come back. You may not see as much as you're hoping to. I had an email from a manager the other day who had an artist who'd had 80 million streams and they'd seen €2,000. Not because the streaming services aren't paying them over, but because it's got lost between territories and they don't collect globally for publishing royalties. So a complex issue. Yeah. Right. Shall I move on?
Mm-hmm.
So So I think this is more or less what we were trying to say with the pie. Recording is a revenue share of 50 to 60%. A song is a share of 10 to 15%. And it's revenue share based on consumption share. So it's not just of all the revenue coming into the streaming services, then is what is consumed of your music. So this is how broadly how the calculation works. And you can, as I say, look at the book, which goes into much more detail, very well explained by Chris Cook. So on a monthly basis, the streaming service looks at how much money they made across all the subscriptions they received, and then how many of all that money that's come into a giant pot, how many streams were then delivered within that month. And then looking at that pot, so you've got a big pot, you're dividing it up between the number of streams. They then will say, well, how many times were your tracks or songs streamed? By yours, in this case, they're looking at the label who has licensed your music. And then what percentage of those total streams were your music? So this is how they're working out from that giant pot how much money they pay over to your label. And so they then allocate that percentage of total income to your repertoire, and that money goes to your label, which is paid according to your revenue share deal. So for example, if your streams had earned on this revenue share basis €100 that month, say, and that money is paid over from Spotify to your label, and then you're on a 20% royalty deal, you're then earning €20, provided you've recouped your balances. If you are, the label will also look if they're due any money under the minimum guarantee deal. So initially, and this is quite complicated, but it is still relevant. Most streaming services, when they're initially licensed to labels, would agree a lump sum and a minimum guarantee per stream, because there is an uncertainty about how well or how successful that streaming service will be. And if there is a minimum guarantee, if it's higher than the amount they actually owe you, then they pay the higher amount. And if there's a difference between that, it's then called breakage. That money then rests with the label. So to come back to why is all this important? It sounds very technical, and it's about being able to check if the money's coming through correctly. But streaming is a different business model, very different business model from the per unit physical sales. It's about sustained listening and repeat micro payments. So when you sold or when you sell a CD for €10, you're getting you €10 on day one. Doesn't matter to you whether, well, it does matter, but it doesn't matter to the money you receive whether that fan goes home and listens to your record once, or whether they go home and listen to it, 500 times a year for the next 10 years. You've got your €10 on day one. Streams are different because you're not getting the €10 up front. In fact, you're getting lots and lots and lots of small payments every time that fan and other fans listen to your music. And the very big difference here is you need to keep people to keep replaying your music. So, yeah. I mean, I'm sure all of us have done that before, where you've gone and bought a CD, gone home and gone, oh, actually, I only like one track of the 14 on the CD.
No, and actually, I know a lot of people, especially younger people, who buy records and keep them sealed and then listen on streaming.
Well, indeed. And so I was having this discussion with someone the other day that actually this is where the industry is not only now back in growth, having lost enormous amounts of money to piracy, where young people not only stopped buying physical music, they then started listening to pirated music, so there was no money coming in. Actually, we're now in a much, much better space where many people, some people still buy the actual vinyl, take it home, and then they pay €10 a month for a Spotify subscription.
Exactly.
So effectively, in some cases, you're earning twice.
Yeah.
And it does depend on genre. I mean, I think we've got, actually not in this room, but we've got hundreds and hundreds of CDs and vinyls in my house too, me and my husband. And yet we also have a Spotify subscription. Yeah. So we're paying twice for music we listen to, which, for the music industry is a great thing, but it doesn't work for all artists in the same way. It works much better for some genres than others. And it works much better. This model, we won't talk about user-centric, but this model works much better for heavy listening because of the way that the calculation is done. So it's not done on a per user base, taking all those subscriptions every month and dividing them between all the listens. So every listen has an equal value in that month, and then is allocated according to the repertoire, which is why per stream rates change each month. And the more listens you have, so say your revenue stays at €1 million, but people are listening more and more heavily, therefore the value per stream goes down. And actually you can see on Spotify the value per stream has gone down over time, even though the total pot has continuously been growing because of the volume of streams. Whereas on Apple, people say, oh, Apple's per stream rates are higher. I mean, their revenue share deals I don't think are that different, but they haven't got as heavy listening.
Yeah,
it's probably something to do with their demographic base and the kind of, probably the age, to be fair, the age of people who are signing up to their service and the backgrounds. And obviously services that are ad funded and free, and Spotify has an ad funded, that also brings Spotify's, when people look at the Spotify per stream rate and they go, oh, that's lower, that's because they tend to give you a blended rate, which is between the Spotify ad funded, so the free Spotify service, and also the paid one. Apple doesn't have a free one, but YouTube obviously has an ad funded service. YouTube subscription, which they have now, pays around the same as all the other subscription services, maybe a bit higher than Spotify, I think a little bit lower than Apple. But the per stream rates, in a way, it's sort of immaterial, because you need to go where people are listening as well. So people can say, oh, well, I can earn more on Apple, but actually if there aren't as many of your fans on Apple, even though the per stream rate may be higher, if people aren't listening there, you're going to earn less overall. So it's difficult, isn't it, really? It's difficult. And like I said, some artists stream really well. The difficulty we're in at the moment is that we're in a world where artists aren't earning live. So there are many bands, particularly rock, particularly indie, that, you know, earned live. They did earn, they were touring, they were playing festivals, they were selling physical CDs. They're now in a world where they can't tour. Maybe they do the occasional live stream, and they're looking at their streaming statements and they're not streaming that well. In fact, quite a lot of, you know, if you're signed to a major label and you're unrecouped, you're not seeing anything from streaming, because you're still paying back your debt out of your
and on 20%. An indie label, depending on what kind of an advance you got.
Yeah, depending on your advance completely. And so there are loads of artists I'll talk to who will say, actually, I don't earn anything at all. I say, well, how are you not earning anything at all? Oh, because I'm still paying back that debt. And this comes on to another issue that we've been talking about a lot through, certainly in the UK, but also through our European organisation, is about those debts being carried forward, those advanced debts being carried forwards for 20 years. The label may have gone into profit overall, but in theory, the artist is still trying to pay off their advance out of their 16% royalty rate, 12% royalty rate, depending on the deductions, and they're not seeing money coming in from streaming yet. Although I also hear of some artists who say, we never thought we'd ever recoup. You know, our records wouldn't be physically pressed and in the stores at the moment, but they are still on streaming services. So there is still some money, small amounts, but some money continuously coming in that if you didn't have streaming, you wouldn't have at all, effectively. So it's a very different model. I mean, I was going to show everyone some quite complicated charts here about how streaming services license. There isn't one deal. So when we say streaming services, you know, have a deal with labels that's somewhere between 50 and 60%, you know, 53, 54%, maybe 52. It depends on who they've done the deal with. And it's quite, if you wanted to start a new streaming service today, it is not easy. There is not one deal. You've got to do deals with all three majors for global Anglo-American repertoire. You need to do deals with the indies via Merlin. Then you need to do deals with indies artists via distributors. So there's a whole range of deals you've got to do on the recorded side, just on the recorded side. And that's without licensing the song. You're only licensing the recording. So we don't make it easy. And depending on the structures of these deals, and what deal those labels then have with artists, it affects how much money, if any, gets back to artists. This is the publishing chart that Chris put together. So on the publishing side, again, even more complicated, because there are big five, certainly for Anglo-American repertoire, and I know in the Spanish-speaking world it will vary a bit, but also, you know, they've got to license the big five through all these joint ventures with the big publishing companies, but also they've got to mop up all the other repertoire via the collecting societies to make sure they've got the song rights as well as having the recording rights. And because they've disassociated the song rights from the recording rights, it's really, legally, it can be quite difficult being a streaming service, as we've seen in America, because you think you've got all the licensing in place, but if you're missing a license because, say, you've had someone's covered a song and uploaded it through a distributor, because you're taking music in through the distributor, you've then got to try and match it back to the song owner. And that's why we end up with a mess between the music that's coming in through labels and distributors into the streaming services, and then the match back to, well, what song is in that music? And there's a whole exercise that takes place with collecting side. There's an organization called INES that's owned by the collecting societies of Germany, Sweden, and the UK, that basically tries to go back and match the recordings to the actual songs and the songwriters. And obviously, songwriters can be with different publishers, and they can be from different countries. So it's not always, okay, it's all in Spain, the artist recorded in Spain, the songwriter is in Spain. So we're going to be able to, with one publisher, we're going to be able to match that recording to that publisher. It might be, you know, the songwriter is in, or there's one songwriter in Chile, there's one in America, and there's another one in Spain, and they have to then match the recording back to the societies of those songwriters. And an awful lot of money gets stuck in this system. Last year, I submitted there was 100 million euros it had been unable to match correctly. They are trying to match it, but this system of uploading the music separately from identifying the song, in a way it's really democratic. It means I can record a song in my bedroom and I can release it, but if I don't know who the songwriter is, actually I might be recording a cover of someone who did a cover. It then requires the system to be able to identify that and pay people correctly, and it's not that good at it at the moment, which causes a whole host of issues. How are we doing for time? I think
we have like 10 minutes left.
Okay, well, I was going to say maybe we can take some questions, because
there's at least one question connecting to what we were talking about, paying for positioning on the Discovery playlist on Spotify. Yeah. Jacob from the UK asks, is this new system not essentially payola?
Well, there's no upfront payment, is there? There's an option in theory to take a lower royalty rate. I mean,
it's reverse payola then.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, in America, like we said, you've always had to pay pluggers to get on radio, even if you sometimes you pay the radio stations directly. If not, you're paying pluggers to do so. Spotify are saying they're being more democratic by not asking for an upfront payment. As I say, I think the reaction to how that rolls out in the US will probably determine whether or not they try and roll it out in Europe. But this push-pull thing is really interesting. So we had a debate around, they call it the digital pie debate. You know, should more money go to the song? So certainly in the UK, and I'm pretty sure elsewhere in Europe, that the songwriters and the publishers would argue that too little money is going to the song. There's actually more money going to the song, or a higher proportion of revenue share is going to the song via streaming. So somewhere around 15%. Than on a physical. So on a physical record, a CD or a vinyl, it's considered about 8% mechanical, I think. Is that right in Spain as well? Yep. So when you press up, vinyl, you pay mechanicals, you pay mechanicals. You don't pay public performance because it's purely a copy. there's not the public performance happening as there is with streaming. So of a physical CD, only about 8% is going to the song, whereas in theory about 12 to 15% is going to the song through streaming. However, it's going to streaming through quite a complex system, and so not necessarily getting back to the songwriter. And there's certainly an argument that more money should go to the song. On radio, when your music is played on the radio in Spain and the UK, about I think it's the same in Spain. Certainly in the UK, about 50% goes to the song through the collecting society, and about 50% goes to the recording through the collecting society when there's a radio play, a radio public performance. And then some money of that obviously goes to the publisher and the songwriter, and some goes to the label. And there's also a direct payment to the artist called equitable remuneration, where there's a direct payment to the artist from radio. In most of the world, there is no direct payment to the artist from streaming, apart from Spain and Hungary. In Spain, Spotify has to pay, I think it's 2 or 3% directly to the Artist Collecting Society. And they paid 1.2 million euros last year in Spain, which then the Artists Collecting Society has to distribute. I'm not sure how exactly.
That's a whole other story.
That's a whole other story. But in the UK, there are some people arguing we should follow the Spanish model, and should we put all the money from streaming, all the push money, maybe not the pull money, maybe not where I've searched for the band, but all the streaming money, should all of that go through the Collecting Society in the same way as it does for radio? And should artists therefore be paid directly regardless of whether or not they've paid off their unrecouped balance from their label deal? Should they just get a direct payment? That's a big debate at the moment in the UK. We have some artists who say the label will never pay you properly. We'd be much better having our streaming services licensed through a collecting society. We get the money directly. Obviously, the labels say, well, if you do that, we're not going to be able to afford to give you advances. We're not going to be able to, because you changed the business model so completely. We won't be able to pay the same royalty rates as we do, and we won't be able to pay the same advances if we no longer have a guaranteed revenue income from streaming, because it's going through collective management. So that's a big debate and quite a controversial one that will come up in the UK Parliament next month.
Okay, I'll follow that up. I have another question from Spin Direct. I'm not sure if I understand correctly, but it's very well expressed, so maybe you do understand. It's from Spin Records, an indie label and booking agency. They say, so for indie labels, what's the best option when it comes to getting the music up there on streaming services? Go for upfront payment DSP, or for the ones which will take a percentage?
For labels, I mean, a lot of indie labels go through Merlin. I'm guessing, obviously, there are different ways deals can be done. A lot do go through Merlin.
I suppose if you're not a member of any Merlin associated association, like not all indie labels are on Merlin, are they?
No, not all are, and some just use distributors directly and pay a distribution fee, don't they? And I guess it's, well, what other services do your distributors offer? And Merlin has signed up to something called the Fair Digital Deals Declaration, and the indies are through Merlin. So the good thing for artists, let's say, about any label that goes through Merlin is when Merlin negotiates new deals and there are lump sum payments. We've not really talked about that, but 2.5 years ago, for example, Facebook and Instagram and Facebook paid $1 billion 2.5 years ago to the recorded music industry and the music publishing industry. $1 billion, and it was a lump sum payment up front. And they said, we don't have the technology, we don't have the content ID yet that, like a YouTube type service has, but we're going to give you $1 billion, and we're going to have 2 years where we can develop and play and use music on user generated content, and you agree not to sue us for 2 years, and then we'll do deals based on actual content usage. And you'll see that that Facebook and Instagram have been kind of experimenting with more and more music content, and they're certainly looking at official music videos. Now, Merlin, when Merlin does those deals, it is committed to and publicly pledged to share proportionately that money with labels, and the labels to share it on with the artists. And they have to then look at a proxy to how to do that. So we would say that at least going through, certainly I would hope that all indie labels will share proportionately the money that they receive. But that's what Merlin agreed to, and what the indies who signed up to the Fair Digital Deals Declaration. But that money took a long time to come through. I know PRS, so the UK Collecting Society for song royalties, performing song royalties, took two and a half years to pay the Facebook money through. I'm guessing it's because they said they needed a way to allocate it. But there's a lot of lump sum deals. TikTok. So whenever people say, well, how does TikTok pay? TikTok says, well, we've given a load of money to the labels, managers, artists. You go and speak to your label and find out how you're getting a share of that back. So it
should be easier, shouldn't it? I mean, it's digital. It should be very clear, and it's getting more and more complicated.
It is, and whenever they do lump sum payments, they always go on sort of market share. So they always say who's got the biggest market share will pay this much, and then that label then says, well, of the artist, which is the bigger market share. So the money always goes back. It kind of tops up the bigger players. It doesn't help developing artists, the market share allocation. There are all kinds of issues here. So as I say, this presentation is focused very much on the kind of subscription music services, but there are lots of different, innovative models happening. And each time, because licensing is so complicated, there tends to be, we'll just give you this money, don't sue us. But we constantly say we would love labels to have, I have no idea. I don't know if you guys do, but that Facebook deal ran out in January. I don't know if a new one's been done. I've asked my members. No one seems to have heard anything. So is it still on a lump sum basis? I know they're testing music videos. How are they going to be paid out if your artist's music videos are being played on the new Facebook, Instagram watch service? How's that shared? I guess it's an ad share, but I don't know. It's really complicated. It's really complicated. And because it's so complicated, it's quite hard.
Yep.
You've got to focus on building a fan base and getting people to listen to you. But then it's quite hard that you can check that you're actually getting the money you should do from the income that the platforms, the labels, and the publishers are.
So I guess it's just the old way as it has always been. You need to build a fan base. But what we have been trying to do here is to show some doors that should try to be opened by managers, artists, or whoever wants to follow the money and see where it is, and then keep scratching. I'm looking at your screen now. So I guess it's digital debate that give us subject to speak for like 2 more hours just for these questions. We're running out of time. So I believe we need to say goodbye for now. I don't even know if you had any more slides, but it seems super interesting anyway. And I recommend everyone, as you said, to go to MMF UK's website and to check out the free download, or to buy the books on Amazon, because there's a lot of great information for anyone interested in these issues. Thanks so much, Annabella. It's been super interesting as ever. We had you in Seville last year, and it was great. And I'm very happy that we are opening this year's edition with you. Sorry.
I'm hoping that one day we can return. We'll be allowed to travel.
Of course.
Again,
I have no doubt about it.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for inviting me. Lovely to see you, and I look forward to watching some of the rest of the Monkey Week content and seeing some of the bands later.
Thank you very much, and just switch on and you will see us doing the monkey. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.